Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. The president is giving what's being billed as a major speech on Thursday regarding the administration's evolving response to the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki addressed criticisms over the U.S. potentially offering third doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, while much of the world has not been given the option of a first vaccine shot.
This is a false choice. And the United States has donated and shared about 140 million doses with over 90 countries, more than all other countries combined. We're donating 500 million doses to 100 countries in need. Last week, we announced a plan to invest $2.7 billion in manufacturing critical vaccine inputs and expanded fill-finish lines at factories. From Senegal to South Africa to India, we've made significant investments in boosting global productions of COVID vaccines. At the same time, the president and this administration has a responsibility to do everything we can to protect people in the United States in this country. And as our health advisors have recommended additional booster shots, we are working to implement that. Our view is we can do both.
It comes as the U.S. eclipses 40 million cases. 1 in 4 of the latest infections are in children, coinciding with the nation's return to schools. Meanwhile, the White House is working behind the scenes with congressional Democrats to pass the next, more ambitious phase of President Biden's spending proposals. Plus, tens of thousands of at-risk Afghan citizens are now on U.S. soil. After limited cooperation between the U.S. military and the Taliban, the militant Islamic group had vowed to enact a more inclusive government. That is not bearing out. The Taliban appointed no women. It did, however, appoint a minister who is on the FBI's most wanted list. And top financial officials warn that a government shutdown is on the horizon if Congress does not vote to increase the debt limit by the end of this month. Earlier, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi blamed the stalled negotiations on Republicans.
During the Trump administration, which amassed over $7 trillion in debt, and that's what this debt ceiling lift is paying for. People say, oh, you just want to spend money. No, we're paying the credit card, the Trump credit card, with what we would do to lift the debt ceiling. And when President Trump was president, we Democrats supported lifting the debt ceiling because it's the responsible thing to do. I would hope that the Republicans would act in a similarly responsible way.
For more, let's bring in Anita Kumar and Eli Stokols. Anita is a senior editor, standards and ethics for Politico, and Eli is a White House reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to you both. And before we get started, Anita, congratulations. It occurs to me that is a new title that you have, the first ever senior editor for Politico for standards and ethics. Congratulations.
Thanks so much. Started yesterday. Still trying to figure it all out.
All right. Well, I want to ask you about what is taking place with the Biden administration here. A lot to discuss today. The White House briefing began addressing the rise in food prices. Anita, what are they saying is behind this rise, especially when it comes to meat?
Well, the Biden administration is saying that there's price fixing. They're accusing basically 4 major companies in the United States of price fixing, and they say that the agricultural and Justice Departments are going to be looking into that and investigating. In the meantime, the administration is trying to figure out what to do about rising prices, and they have pledged to give out money, coronavirus relief money, to smaller producers around the country as they look into this issue. You know, a lot of people sort of wondering sort of where this came from, and the administration says that this was particularly egregious because some of these larger corporations and companies did use the money from the coronavirus relief package earlier this year, and so they are looking into that.
And Eli, it is not just food, but fuel prices on the rise as well. Last month, the Biden administration said it was stepping up regulation to reverse that. Since then, there have been weather-related disruptions to the fuel supply. What's the latest on that?
Well, the administration has released some of the fuel from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve after the storm. But, you know, there are still electricity problems. You saw the president travel last week to South Louisiana. We saw him in recent days up in the Northeast in New Jersey and New York. And, you can put all of this together, putting the Secretary of Agriculture at the podium, putting the president out there talking about COVID tomorrow, and the president out there meeting with people affected by these extreme weather events. You're seeing the president, after a rocky couple of weeks related to Afghanistan primarily, trying to put himself out there and show that this is a president administration that is responding to the everyday challenges that regular people are facing, whether that's a horrific storm and a sort of apocalyptic event, or just the ripple effects of that, of a pandemic. When people are having food supply issues, gas supply issues. And so they're trying to put the president out there and show that he is taking all the actions that he can take at an executive level to respond to those situations, to make sure that Americans in the affected areas don't have to wait in a 9-hour line for gasoline, and that relief money does flow to these states. But obviously, it's a challenge. In Louisiana, you can release the extra barrels of oil, but the gas stations still need to have electricity to operate. The refineries still need to get back up and running. And so there really is only so much that a president can do in that situation. And from what we're seeing down there and really up along New Jersey and New York as well, it's going to be some time before these communities are fully back on their feet.
Right, because we're continuing to hear stories about people still waiting to get, as you say, gas and fuel for their generators at a time when we know that infrastructure with the power grid is going to take weeks to get back up and running. Anita, let's talk about the battle over raising the debt ceiling. Earlier today, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that government funding could run out by October 1st. She said even the appearance of a potential government default could damage U.S. financial markets. So give us a sense here, what's at stake?
Well, the Democrats have said, look, that they are going to raise the debt ceiling. You heard the House Speaker call sort of on Republicans to vote for this and do the same. But it's a little bit of a game of chicken here between the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats, the Speaker said today that, look, it's not going to be in this reconciliation bill. Of course, that's the bill that just the Democrats are going to pass. She wants the Republicans to have to vote on this. So we'll see what mechanism this goes through. We don't really fully know when they're going to bring this up. So they could bring it up in any number of bills coming up in the next few weeks. They could put it in the government spending bill, the bill that would fund the federal government for these coming months. That's going to run out of money at the end of the month. But, the Treasury Secretary is saying, look, basically, we don't want to get to the last minute here. We want to show the world and show the markets that everything is running fine and that the United States can pay its bills. So, you know as well as I do how Congress works. They always wait until these final deadlines. And what the Treasury Secretary was saying there is that sometime in October, we're going to have a problem. And I suspect that we won't see Congress probably acting until closer to that deadline. They have a lot of things on their list to do in these coming weeks, several bills, the government spending bill, the debt ceiling. And so you may see some combination of all of those things together. But what's at the heart of this is Democrats and Republicans sort of looking at each other and wondering who's going to blink first. What mechanism is this going to take and who's going to vote for it?
Yeah, we've seen many a time 11th hour agreements here, as you note, Anita, right down to the wire. Eli, let me ask you about this. President Biden is set to speak about the administration's evolving coronavirus strategy on Thursday. There are a number of questions about whether or not we're going to be hearing anything new on that front. What more are we actually learning?
Well, the administration has been, they played it a little close to the vest in terms of what these six-pronged plan, what this is going to look like that the president is going to announce tomorrow. But the press secretary, Jen Psaki, today in the briefing room hinted that it will have some tangible effect on people if they are unvaccinated. I think reading between the lines, there is an expectation that there will continue to be a push toward mandating the vaccine and really maybe even incentivizing the private sector to mandate that their workforce, that their customers perhaps are vaccinated, that there could be federal benefits potentially that are, given to companies that comply with that. Whether it's punitive, that remains to be seen. But again, this is speculation on my part, but it just seems pretty clear that at this point we're now in a phase of this pandemic where, the president sort of initially was pretty good about keeping expectations low, surpassing them when it came to shots in arms, vaccinations in the early days. But, July 4th was a pivot point where he sort of succumbed to the good news and the good feelings around America turning the corner. Now we're obviously going backwards. And I think there is a frustration in a sense that it's time for some tougher tactics here. And so I think we're going to see a sterner message from the president when he speaks on this tomorrow to tell the country that, look, it's time. Everybody has to get on the same page here. And the vaccination rate has ticked up with the Delta variant and the surge that we've seen in the last few months as people who wound up, seeing loved ones hospitalized have finally gone out and gotten the shot. But it's still moving pretty slowly. There's still a lot of resistance. And so I think you'll see a president trying to use the bully pulpit to rally the country, to do this for the broader economic good and the broader good in terms of public health. And also just being able to get back to normal, he'll probably say requires being more responsible about the pandemic and more proactive about it. And I think we'll see whatever these 6 things are that he's going to lay out as part of his plan, his new plan. I think we will see him trying to use whatever power he has as president to compel people to get the vaccine and to compel the private sector to follow suit.
A lot of folks very interested to see what new will be unveiled. Meantime, Anita, the new government formed by the Taliban in Afghanistan, as we mentioned, does not include any women. It does, however, include a senior member with ties to al-Qaeda. Now, here is Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday with more on that.
Despite professing that a new government would be inclusive, the announced list of names consists exclusively of individuals who are members of the Taliban or their close associates, and no women. We're also concerned by the affiliations and track records of some of those individuals. We understand the Taliban has presented this as a caretaker cabinet. We will judge it and them by its actions. The international community has made clear its expectation that the Afghan people deserve an inclusive government.
Anita, what does this mean for America's future relationship with Afghanistan?
Well, it's tough because there's a couple things going on here. As the secretary just said, there are a lot of concerns about this new government. But at the same time, there are diplomats around the world. So it's not just the United States, but in many, many other countries who feel that the Taliban government from before, I'm talking two decades plus ago, was kind of left alone, and they grew and they became more powerful and more isolationist because the United States and other countries didn't engage with them. So there is a sense from the United States and other countries that there needs to be some kind of engagement. What that engagement looks like, we're just not really sure. The secretary and other counterparts from countries around the world were talking about that very issue today. What they will recognize, if anything, what that interaction will be like, and we just don't really know. But as you can see from those comments, there are concerns about engaging with them and what this means for the future of the country. Of course, right now, the United States really is most concerned, I would say, or one of the biggest concerns is getting those remaining Americans out and Afghans who still want to leave that country. And so they are still working with the Taliban to try to figure out how to do that. And so far, what you've seen is that the Taliban has made good so that they've seen on this promise that people can leave, that Americans can leave the country. And so that's their first order of business. But they do need to figure out what those diplomatic relations are going to look like, if there are any at all.
And Eli, following up on Anita's point, on Tuesday, the State Department said less than 100 Americans remain in Afghanistan. What is the latest on those who want to leave?
Well, Antony Blinken is over in the Middle East right now trying to facilitate the effort to get those people out. I think it's fair to say that 100 people is probably a low estimate. It's an estimate the administration may be comfortable with, but it may not account for a lot of people who the State Department has not yet accounted for, who have not made contact, who have tried to make contact, but who may be in the more far-flung regions of the country and having difficulty getting to the airport, getting to find somewhere where they can find a contact to the State Department of the U.S. government. And so, they are trying to facilitate those departures. The press secretary talked a little bit about the challenge of this now that there are no American troops on the ground in Afghanistan. There's really no way to obviously control the airport, but when you're relying on third parties to fly people out, you don't have control over the security screenings either. And so that slows the process down and makes it harder for the U.S. to allow some of these people to land potentially back in the U.S. at military bases here. So it's become a more complicated process now that there are no U.S. troops on the ground in Kabul. It's a diplomatic effort. Obviously, the Secretary of State is trying to broker agreements with other countries, with other organizations, people who are close to some of these people and who may be able to help arrange transportation to get them out of the country. But it's difficult, it's challenging, and it's hard to find these people. And still, there have to be a lot of people out there who are afraid to make contact or to try to make contact with the State Department or with these organizations because they fear, and understandably so, that if they encounter the Taliban anywhere and they inspect their electronics, their phones, and they see these contacts, that there may be brutal repercussions for them just for having associated with the Americans, despite what the Taliban is apparently telling the U.S. government about allowing transportation and passage out of the country.
All right, we'll continue to watch that. Shifting gears, Anita, you touched on this earlier. You write for Politico that legislative priorities for Democrats are, quote, falling by the wayside as Congress gears up for a fall packed with spending and budget fights. You add that President Biden's opportunities for meaningful victories are dimming. How does this play into the upcoming midterms?
Yeah, it's a really tough time for him. As you know, the president has made fighting COVID and also his spending bills his top priorities. And he's got a lot of Democrats who are anxious for him to make good on his promises, things that we heard him talk about at the beginning of the term and over during when he was campaigning for president, things like immigration, raising the minimum wage, something we haven't heard about in quite a long time, protecting the right to vote, protecting communities from gun violence. So there's a long list of sort of top tier Democratic priorities that people in the party are saying, look, if we don't pass some of these bills and all these things need to be done through Congress, then we're not going to have something to run on during the midterms. And so they're getting worried about that. Of course, the president is really, his top priority, of course, is COVID, but he's also really pushing Congress to pass two huge spending plans. And he is sort of taking that bet that if those plans pass, he has something that he can campaign on. He'll say, look at my record. I'm dealing with COVID, and I'm also working on the economy and passing these plans that can reshape society. I mean, these are huge plans that deal with everything from childcare to education. So there are some in his party that are getting anxious because they are looking at the clock and they are saying, or looking at the calendar and saying, there's not much time left. It sounds funny to say that, but once we enter sort of the end of the year, really things are going to shift to politics, and it's going to be hard for Congress next year to pass big priorities of the president's.
And we know just from conversations with activists that when it comes to things like voting rights, when it comes to things like police reform, that they plan to keep up that political pressure on the White House to do more. All right, Anita Kumar and Eli Stokols, thank you both very much.